Hi, so I'm here with Rob Wüst and discussing the latest preprint from his group um, about comparing deconditioning among healthy people who had bed rest with some of the uh, sequelae of exercise that his group has found in ME/CFS and long COVID. So, thanks,
Yep.
Rob. Why don't you just kind of discuss what it was that you set out to do, and what the point was?
Yeah, yeah. So our lab does a lot of research outside long COVID and ME/CFS research. So we also study, for instance, how inactivity affects the human body. We do it in collaboration with the Space Agency, NASA, and also the European Space Agency. And there we actually were part of a larger bed rest study for quite some time already. Since 2015, this project started, and in 2019 we did actually the actual experiments
And
in
just
uh,
so
in Germany.
the space agencies are interested because obviously people are in space for a long time,
Exactly.
not moving
Exactly.
around very much.
Exactly. So the reason that they are interested is in what happens up in space. What happens when people are severely deconditioned under microgravity conditions? Because in the end, we want to go to Mars. So essentially, the understanding of why we want to go to Mars also helps us understanding what happens on Earth when we become physically inactive. And laying still in bed is an analog for space flight in that sense that the gravity is not vertical, if it's like on your body when you're standing, but it's sort of perpendicular to the orientation of the body, so to say. And
Okay,
that means that there's less gravity on the body. And laying in bed is therefore an analog to going into space.
I see. Okay, okay.
So that's the reason why they do these studies, these patients. And they have different lengths, 5 days, 20 days, and this was a specific study for 60 days, so 2 months.
So you already had that data coming into
Exactly.
this situation.
Exactly. So we already had a PhD student in our lab, did a whole PhD on this project, and he graduated last year. And interestingly, his major publication in this from this project came out in the same month as our first paper came out with the long COVID
And why
skeletal
don't you
muscle
just recap? Why
abnormalities.
don't you just recap for us what that study found?
The bed as our bed rest studies essentially found that when you undergo bed rest, when you're laying in bed for 6 days, you already see the first signs of type 2 diabetes. So insulin resistance starts to build up. Essentially, you lose muscle mass. You also lose eventually mitochondrial mass, so the energy producing organelles in your body, and it all sort of accumulates over the period of 60 days. You get more accumulation of glucose or sugars and fats inside your body. And those two essentially, all those processes accumulate over 60 days, eventually making the muscle smaller and more insulin resistant. Now, what we spotted when we did those studies is that we could actually very easily determine because they also did an exercise test, an exercise and a bike test, and essentially we realized pretty quickly it's like, can this be um, a way to back up our idea that this conditioning does not cause the problems that we see in our long COVID cohort? Because of a student literally sat next to they literally sat next to each other in the lab,
Mhm.
um, and they just essentially compared screens and said, this doesn't really fit with our idea that deconditioning the general idea that deconditioning causes the problems in long COVID. And then we got our publication, our long COVID publication came out, that actually also suggested critics suggested it's all deconditioning. And some people have
So
already.
that was just, and that came out. That was 2 years ago now. That came out, or
Oh,
last
so
year?
that was a year and a half ago when our first Nature Communication paper was published on long COVID and skeletal muscle abnormalities,
Right.
um, and with regards to post-exertional malaise particularly. And the criticism was mainly, this is all deconditioning. This is what you see with people who are inactive and are
Right, and
unfit.
because that's been their argument all along for 30 years, essentially, with ME/CFS, that basically people are deconditioned, and that's why they need graded exercise therapy or
Yeah,
cognitive behavior therapy to get them to go back to activity.
exactly. Exactly. So that was the sort of the context essentially when we thought, okay, um, we we would like to study this in more detail. We would like to differentiate the two things and see whether the change that we see in one condition is the same as we see in another condition. Um, so and at the same time, we also started to collect samples from an MECFS project. So we received funding from various sources. So the patient-led organization, Solve ME, the Dutch government chipped in. We have some patient organization also in the UK, ME Research UK, but also the Dutch patient organization. They all thought we also need to do this in MECFS. So we did this actually the same experiment as we did in our long COVID cohort, also in MECFS. So we took muscle biopsies before and after induction of post-exertional malaise
By a CPET.
by CPET, exactly, to study the differences, what happens with exercise. But the pre-biopsies was actually this sort of the steady state condition. And that's what we use now essentially in this preprint. Um, so we now have three groups. We have the healthy controls, we have long COVIDs, and we have matched age and sex MECFS patients. And the MECFS patients were already ill before the start of the COVID pandemic. So they were diagnosed before the long COVID pandemic started.
These are not long COVID ME/CFS ME patients. These are pre-coronavirus pandemic.
Exactly. So different course than SARS-CoV-2 virus. Um, and so that allows us to compare ME with long COVID, whether there are differences. But we also think maybe there is a disease duration effect, so that there are similar diseases, but they have a sort of just a different disease length.
So the differences that you did find between the long COVID group and the ME/CFS group, you might be explained by a longevity factor, by the fact that the ME/CFS patients have been generally sick longer, and so there may be more long-term sequelae that we don't see yet in the long COVID patients.
Yeah, exactly. So the long COVID patients have only been ill for 1 to 3 years max at the time of our measurements, and the ME patients were ill for at least 5 years, and that means that we don't know whether the duration or the progression of the disease is different, or whether there are inherent differences between the two diseases. That's something we just cannot figure out because we would for that to study, we would have to wait another, 10 years for the long COVID to have the same length in terms of disease duration, and that's not possible yet.
So basically, there was sort of one set of studies which differentiated the deconditioned patients or the ones who had bed rest from
Yeah,
both patient groups, and then there were
exactly.
some differences as well between the patient groups themselves.
Yeah. So what we did is we had patients undergoing bed rest. So we had before and after measurements of the same person, and that's a very strong design because we really see the differences in each individual person, how they change with bed rest. And then we had a comparison with three different groups with a cross-sectional comparison with three different disease groups. So two diseases and a healthy control as a comparison.
Oh, so there was a healthy control group who did not go through the 60-day period as well. Okay.
Exactly. So we had two really separate. There were really separate comparisons before after bed rest and another healthy control
I see.
group
I
and
see. Okay.
two disease groups. And with those, we studied the exercise responses. So what happens during a CPET test, a maximum exercise test, and then we also measured the changes that happen at the skeletal muscle level. Now, when you look at the overall exercise responses. So if you would look at one or two main variables from the exercise response that people always use as a marker for exercise tolerance or exercise capacity, um, the patients, long COVID and ME patients, were very similar to the post-bed rest patients
Hmm.
because they had the similar values from looking from the outside. But then if we look deeper into the changes that happen in the cardiopulmonary system, so in the lung and in the circulatory system, the heart rate changes, for instance, we saw already a difference occurring between the two populations. So the bed rest itself has a different effect on the cardiorespiratory system
Hmm.
during exercise as it had in the patients. So the patient responded different to various more detailed analyses essentially in these
Right.
tests. And actually, that was not new because if you look in the literature, there are people that suggest similar things. If you, for instance, look at the long COVID patients, anyone could get long COVID. And if you have been ill for 1 year, but you were an ex-Olympic athlete, for instance, your exercise capacity is still okay.
Hmm.
Uh, but if you've been ill for 20 years, then of course your exercise capacity is reduced to much lower values. But it doesn't mean that the underlying changes that occur are due to the fact that people have been
Inactive.
deconditioned for 1 or 2 years or 20 years.
Right.
So that's why we looked further into the skeletal muscle changes that are important for understanding the whole body responses to exercise. So that's, for instance, muscle size, the how many capillaries you have in your muscles, in your muscle tissue, and how many mitochondria you have, so how many organelles you have to produce your energy. And normally we would see in healthy conditions a very nice correlation and a nice relationship between the exercise capacity and various markers for the what I just mentioned
Right.
in the skeletal muscle. So people with a very good exercise capacity generally have a lot of capillaries around the fiber, a lot of mitochondria, a lot of energy producing organelles, and the muscles also look healthy essentially. Now, and there's a nice relation. The more you get the more you have from one, the higher your exercise capacity is. Now that didn't happen at all. Actually, no. So that happened. That relationship was maintained before and after bed rest. So just being physically inactive reduce your exercise capacity, but also reduce um, your skeletal muscle changes that are underlying these effects.
Right. So there was a direct correlation. There was a direct connection there.
Yes, exactly. There was a direct connection there. That connection wasn't there in the patient population. So we already realized that there is something happening there that is irrespective of just changes in one variable relates directly to change another variable. And that's essentially what made us realize that on the group level, but also on individual level, the differences that we see are not solely due to deconditioning. Um, and that, of course, is newsworthy in itself because that's something that patients particularly well, they understand that, but a lot of the clinicians and fellow researchers do not directly did not really how do I say this realize this that these things are really separate.
Well, and
And
that also because, of course, the deconditioning idea is the theory, is what's behind the former standard of care of graded exercise therapy and cognitive behavior therapy, designed to get people to increase their activity to counteract the purported deconditioning.
yeah. Yeah, so that's one of the sort of how do I say this? Um, Well, that's not a direct conclusion from the study that we did. That's really important to realize because we did not make patients with long COVID or ME/CFS more inactive or more active.
Right.
Um, we just did a group comparison, so to say. And if you would make patients more active, do a training study with you when you're overexert, for instance, constantly, you would in healthy people you would probably see an increase in these variables at skeletal muscle level, but we don't know what we would see in those in the patient population if they would decrease or if they would change a different way
Right.
because we just simply didn't do that study. So I don't want to make very make conclusive statements about the use or non-use of exercise training in these states. We just see that the changes that the difference that we see at the skeletal muscle are simply not due to deconditioning. So there is an additional factor that causes the changes.
Okay.
Um, that's important to realize because of course we know that people with ME have been inactive for a long time.
Right.
I mean that's inherent in their um, in their
Condition.
disease process, and also to avoid getting into the PEM cycles, into the crashes all the time. So they try to avoid them going into the crash by reducing their exercise performance, so to say. Um, so we don't completely exclude the effects of deconditioning. However, we see things that are not compatible with only simple deconditioning itself.
Okay. So the
It's really
presumption
something.
is that there's some other factor that's at play. The
Yeah,
one question that comes up is that because people also report post-exertional malaise from cognitive factors,
yeah,
from cognitive
yeah,
exertion, how does that
exactly.
relate to the muscle,
Yeah,
the muscle damage that you see?
yeah. So this is a very good question. So indeed, PEM comes in different shapes and flavors. In our study, we only test people that have physical PEM. Which is the prerequisite to be part of our study, because that's what we focus on in our initial study. So maybe 10 years down the line, I will be doing lots of different PEM experiments and
I see.
different types of PEM. But for the first set of experiments, we really focus on the physical PEM and not a cognitive PEM, because if you I mean, the physical PEM is more linked to exercise performance and exercise, muscle use, the use of muscle, and it's easier to link it also to skeletal muscle biopsies.
I see. Okay.
So we take muscle biopsies, so we want to do something with that exercise and that physical PEM. I know of people that do studies with cognitive PEM, and then, of course, you want to focus on the cognitive behavior before and after. That's the first low-hanging fruit people that are going to study. And of course, you cannot take a biopsy from the brain because then you lose a bit of your memory and yourself. So, and therefore, people use MRI scans or other types of in non-invasive measurements of looking at brain function. Um, how cognitive PEM affects skeletal muscle, we have simply no idea.
Okay. So basically, this is just you're looking at this domain, and it really doesn't speak to exactly how that would happen on a cognitive level. It's a different phenomenon or a set.
Exactly. So I would expect, of course, that there is because, but that's maybe an important point to make is if you if the disease or if PEM does something else to the body than just deconditioning, that means that maybe there is something circulating in the body, or whether there's something happening with the immune system or something with the nervous system. If those things are also underlying cognitive PEM, then of course you can also expect that these effects that we look at are also affecting skeletal muscle. If the disease, for instance, is caused by autoimmunity and autoantibodies against something in the body, not only in the brain but also in different parts of the body, then of course also skeletal muscle can be affected. And it would just be up to us essentially or other people worldwide to broaden this field and dive into the different subgroups of patients.
So what's next? So this paper is a preprint. Still, presumably has been sent out, or you're waiting
Yeah,
to see
yeah,
what
yeah.
public.
So it's been sent out, and we are waiting for our colleagues to respond to this.
Mhm.
So we get reviewer comments from colleagues who will critically read and comment on our publication, and we're just waiting first to see what they say, and then it will be in publication,
And
and
so
that's always that can take some time.
it always takes time. What are the implications, or are there immediate implications that you see at this point, or what's your sort of takeaway?
Yeah, so the takeaway I would say is that there are various hypotheses based on why skeletal muscle changes can occur in patients with ME/CFS, and just the factor deconditioning is not the single one. There are various additional factors that contribute here. We recently published a review article where we were asked to summarize essentially the different.
Oh, you stop for a second there.
That are linked to the disease that are.
I missed you just a second there.
Oh,
You
sorry.
were closed for a
Oh,
second.
yeah,
So you were just recently asked to
sorry.
do something, and then you
Yeah,
froze.
so we were recently asked to do a review on this topic to see which hypotheses are underlying the change that we see in the skeletal muscle, not only us, but also other groups worldwide. And they're very pillars, so to say, different ideas. And one of them is the deconditioning, which is a very strong, we're a very strong believer, so to say. And our publication now really suggests that it's not just that pillar that we need to highlight and need to focus on. We need to think for the other pillars as well, which includes a microvascular dysfunction, but also autoimmunity. There are some neurological changes, so things in the brain and in the nervous system that can affect skeletal muscle function. And we also highlight that some people have found that ion channels can be different. So the way that the muscle is being contracting is
Mhm.
contracting, and those are really likely disease mediators, like direct disease mediators. And of course, if we know more what the exact cause of the disease is, that gives us very, yeah, direct links to what underlies these changes in skeletal muscle abnormalities. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks very much. I appreciate the
Welcome.
your time.